Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be doing a huge dive into the new standard format with the release of Duskmourn. We are going to be looking at the best performing decks. We're going to get a bunch of data from UntappedGG, looking at Mythic rank ladder. We are going to look at a bunch of MTGO leagues. There was a large Japanese tournament over the weekend as well. So I've got like 12, 15 deck lists here, a whole bunch of things. And that's excluding kind of the stock list. We're seeing like Lizards kind of keep up the Orzhov mid-range decks. I'm not going to include those there. They're pretty stock right now. If there's kind of newer decks with older cards that featured, or just kind of new ideas, stuff like that, we're going to cover it in today's video. If this is standard best of 3, by the way, if you're looking for the best of 1 video, it is posted already on the channel. We will cover everything here. I'll paste all these deck lists for you with timestamps so you can jump around the video, hear about the decks, what sideboard cards, stuff like that. The guide's all here to help you kind of navigate the metagame that is shaping up. If you're looking for other formats, we'll get through them later in the week. Just getting back from vacation, so started to do a little bit of research into the format, getting back in terms of the video game. So we will look at Mythic rank, like I said, and then let's jump into it. So we're going to start off with the popularity of decks. This is just kind of what you'll see on the ladder. This is over 6 days, 12,000 matches in Mythic being played. And then we'll look at the deck lists themselves. If you do enjoy this type of content, really quick, like, comments help the video a lot. We're also really close to 15,000 subs on the channel, which was a goal. If we can hit that, in the next week or so, that'd be really sweet as well. So Dimir Midrange, most played deck, 6%. Now, if we contrast this to best of 1, the mono red Leyline deck was about 25%. So much flatter in terms of distribution of decks being played in the best of 3 format right now. Golgari Midrange at about 5. We have Gruul Aggro at about 3.5. Boros Mice at about 3%. This is a little misleading, the name it could be, because there is a Boros Auras deck that plays a mouse sub-theme that we're going to get to. Then we have Convoke, Lizards at about 2%, Azorius Control at 1, Mono Red at about 1. So still pretty early in terms of the format. Keep in mind, these are all kind of smaller sample sizes as we begin. As the weeks kind of settle, we get more league data, some more tournaments, we'll start seeing some other stuff as well. But so the first deck up has the current highest win rate in Mythic, just in terms of smaller sample size. It's not a new deck, but I know some folks have done well with mono black skeletons in the past. So this deck currently is showing a almost 75% win rate over 39 matches. So not a huge sample, but not the smallest sample the same way. Corpse of the Lost is kind of the engine of the deck, giving your skeletons haste, power, and then can be brought back to your hand if you've descended. Case of the Stash Skeleton is another way to get some skeletons. You have Tiny Bones, Forsaken Miner, Cult Conscript, all ways to kind of get going. You have Builder's Talent as some hand hate, bunch of cheap removal, Liliana's Thoughtstalker Warlock. While not itself a skeleton, can eat at your opponent's hand. The Sandstorm Verge is a way to target your opponent to activate Crime. Very easily could add things like Mirror Pool or Myrex just to make the mana base a little bit more resilient in case you flood. Sideboard's got a bunch of removal, cut down. I think Anoint with Affliction, if these Gruul style aggro decks become more popular. The Exile is super relevant, also really reasonable against the Dimir decks, given that it's just another cheap removal spell, hits most of their stuff. Dreams of Steel and Oil is hand hate, just a bunch of removal basically, and some hand hate mixed in, so nothing like crazy in terms of that. Moving on, Izzet Hellraiser, 66%. So this was a deck that was picking up some popularity towards the end of the Boros season, and it got some updates in terms of the deck. So, deck's built around Excruciator Hellraiser. 6 mana, 3 red, and then they cost 3 less if you have 9 or more cards in your graveyard. And then when it enters the battlefield, you exile 3 cards at random from your graveyard, you choose a non-creature, non-land from among them, and copy it. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. So you kind of combo out with Season of Weaving, which makes copies of your Hellraiser. And it lets you kind of go there. If you have Bitter Reunion out, you can give everything haste. So it's kind of a big explosive turn that gets going. A new card that's being played in the deck is Roaring Furnace. So let's see if we get a little bit bigger here, if it helps out. So this is one of the room cards. So you'll see it on the left-hand side here. How this works, you can pay either side, and then it enters the battlefield as an enchantment permanent, and then you're able to, later in the game, kind of on layaway, pay to unlock the other half. So it's only initially going to be used as the Roaring Furnace side, I would imagine, in more games, just being another Fires of Victory style effect. Deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand for 2 mana, and then for 5 mana, you have no max hand size. In the beginning of your end step, you draw a card. This is also permanent that Caprice's Hellkite can then make get into play, and then you get that effect. I don't think it coming into play would unlock the door from Hellraiser. I think unlocking the door is part of the cost. Similar with clones, or if you blink, it doesn't come in. So that's something to worth checking out, I would say. But the rest of the deck's just kind of putting cards into your graveyard. You have things like Artisan's Talent as a way to loot. Deal some extra damage. Chandra can double up on effects. Season of Weaving bounces their stuff. Ill-Time Explosion as a sweeper. Brass's Tunnel draws, discards effects with it. Then your sideboard, Graveyard Hate. Betrayer's Bargain, a new card. So 2 mana as additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature or enchantment, or pay 2. Deals 5 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. It's an interesting card here. You do have to sacrifice. This is a cast trigger, if I'm not mistaken. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. So this is an additional cost. So that's an interesting one to include. It is the 5 damage effect, but you may want to just be playing like Scorching Shot instead. It's just a little bit easier. Your mana may be tied up in that case there. So this is an interesting sideboard card. Disdainful Stroke, negate his counters for big mana decks. Pyroclasm is a new card that came in, very good against the low to the ground token decks, the mice deck, the mono red deck, stuff like that. Brotherhood's End as just another sweeper. Ral for the grindier matchups. Virtue can copy triggers you control, get some value, double up on some other triggers. And then Overlord of the Boiler Gates, just another creature, comes in, deals 4 damage. Another nice clone target, deals 4 damage to any target. You could also Impending it, so if this is the first time you're seeing this type of effect. Impending is basically you pay the cost, the impending cost. In this case, it's 4 mana. It just enters as an enchantment. You still get the enter effect of 4 damage, and then it has counters on it. So your end step, you remove a counter. Once all the counters are removed, so over 4 turns, it just shifts into becoming a creature instead. So that's kind of that there. Jund Leyline, folks, the mono red. The mono red deck has made its way to best of 3. Reddit is in arms. Call the National Guard. So Jund Leyline, this deck actually just won a large Japanese tournament over the weekend. The finals was 2 variations of Gruul. Like Jund is just for Calisel Sword. It's basically Gruul aggro decks that are in here. So this one's at 63%. Leyline of Resonance is the hot topic card from the set. Comes into play if you have it in your opening hand for 0 mana. It gets put into play turn 0 game actions. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a single creature you control, copy that spell. You may choose new targets. So the big thing with it is using stuff with like Scamp or Heartfire Hero. You could potentially turn to kill your opponent with things like Turn Inside Out, Monstrous Rage, Scamp like flinging itself, or Calisel Sword, always to kind of deal that damage. This version here has got some interaction with Shock, single copy of Manifold Mouse, single copy of Giant Growth. So notably not a huge amount of protection spells in the main, a little bit more mono red focused. Big thing, we got another untapped land in Thornspire Verge. Enters, makes red if you control a mountain or forest. It also makes green. 1 Restless Ridgeline, the mana base. Sideboard, you have some protection spells and Snakeskin Veil. Obliterating Bolt, 4 damage with Exile. Paw Patch Formation, gets rid of Atraxas, get rid of like temporary lockdown, any sort of enchantments. Also could just draw you a card, which is nice. Scorching Shot, 5 damage. Urbrass Forge for the heavy removal matchups, and another Restless Ridgeline for the grindier matchups. So generally speaking, because this is a 19-line deck, when you're going to be playing against the kind of grindier matchups, you'll go up the extra land. It's got utility in there, and then you bring in your Forges. Just a kind of, if they're bringing in a lot of removal, you probably don't want Leyline. It's a dead draw like late game, and they're generally going to have more interaction for you. So I would take out the Leylines, bring in the Forges, add the extra land for some more interaction. So this is called Mono Black Skeletons. This one is not Mono Black Skeletons. 60% win rate, 140 games. This is the Bloodletter combo deck. So new card in the deck. This one was, by the way, 60%. Unstoppable Slasher. So 3 mana, 2/3 Death Touch. When it deals combat damage to the player, they lose half their life rounded up. If it dies, has no counters on it, you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with 2 stun counters on it. This, with Bloodletter, is basically a one-hit KO. How it works, this deals half the damage, then they lose half their life, and then this deals twice the damage, so it basically one-shots them no matter what their life is. I believe this version's from Croakies, if I'm not mistaken. Overlord of the Bale Mark, another of the Overlords. This enters battlefield, attacks or mills, then you may return a non-avatar creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's kind of card draw in the deck. You also have the Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber. So 3 mana, draw at your end step, you draw a card. If you control a demon, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, otherwise you lose 2 life. So if you don't have a demon, end step, draw a card, lose 2 life kind of effect. You do have the demons in Bloodletter, and then the Ritual Chamber makes a demon for 5 mana, a 6/6 demon. Demonic Council can also help you tutor your pieces, grind elements, Liliana, just a lot of removal in there. Ghost Vacuum is another new card. Graveyard Hate that can then anything you exile with it creature-wise, you can make copies of it for 6 mana. Notably, the Sorcery Clause. I was playing this in my Brawl deck, and I thought it was instant speed, and I lost the game because of that. And a bunch of hand hate, bunch of different removals, sweepers. Withering Torment is another new card, just flexible ways to hit creatures or enchantments in black. Leyline for graveyard hate, Shieldred, kind of the mid-range mirrors, Aquazot's in here for the more aggressive decks. You gain some life, even just like the Golgari mid-range deck, stuff like that to grind them out. Fix Command as another sweeper. You then go to Azorius Enchantments. So this one's at 58%. So a lot of new cards here. This set really kind of built out the enchantment deck. So we'll start here with Entity Tracker. 3 mana, 2/3 flash. This has the Eerie ability. We'll see a number of cards with this ability. So whenever enchantment you control enters, whenever you fully unlock a room, you draw a card. So this is what's usually referred to as an Enchantress card, kind of giving you that value. So notably, this is enters the battlefield as opposed to cast. Sometimes it may be cast triggers, kind of going from there. You have Enduring Innocence. So 3 mana, 2/1 lifelink. It is an enchantment creature, so it would trigger the Entity Tracker. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, you draw a card, triggers only once per turn. When it dies, if it was a creature, return it to the battlefield. So this would actually then trigger the Entity Tracker again when it dies. So a lot of card advantage in this deck. I'm going to focus on the creatures first, and then we'll look at the enchantments. So we have Gremlin Tamer, 2 mana, 2/2. This is the kind of signpost uncommon for the archetype in limited, but it's quite a strong card. It's kind of like a young pyromancer style effect. Whenever an enchantment enters, so same ability, Eerie ability, you make a 1/1 Gremlin token, and then you have Inquisitive Glimmer. The enchantment spells cost 1 less, unlock costs 1 less. You're not really unlocking stuff, it's mostly for the enchantments. So those are the creatures. Actually, there's one more kind of hanging out here. Optimistic Scavenger, 1 mana. Whenever an enchantment enters, you put a 1/1 counter on another target creature. Let's look at the enchantments now, because there's a number of new ones. So Reprint in Ethereal Armor. Creature gets first strike and +1/1 for each other enchantment you control, or each enchantment you control. So this gets its power very large. You have Shard Mage's Rescue, so a protection effect. 1 mana flash, you could give a creature hexproof and also give it 1 extra power. Hexproof's only till end of turn. Bayflight, flash again, another way to give hexproof, which is nice. An enchanted creature gets +1/0 and has flying. Ossification is removal. And then the big one, Sheltered by Ghosts. 2 mana, enters. You exile target non-land permanent until an opponent controls, until Sheltered by the Ghost leaves the battlefield. Enchanted creature gets +1, has lifelink and ward 2, which is really strong in that case. We also got Flood Farm Verge, a new one of the dual line cycles. Sideboard's got removal and Elspeth Smite, Destroy Evil for enchantment and big creatures, some counters, Ossification as more removal, Kidnap, a way to kind of gain control of target creature. This one seems a little iffy. I maybe just want to play like more counters, to be honest, just protect against sweepers type effect, Disdainful Stroke, stuff like that. You have a lot of cheap removal kind of in there for like Atraxa, stuff like that. So there's another version. This went 5.0 in a league by Builder 5s. This one here is a Boros version. So it's a mouse sub-theme. You see a lot of the elements of the mono red deck, Manifold Mouse, Heartfire Hero, Emberheart Challenger, The Mice with the Valiant ability, putting on these auras gives it some value as well because it triggers Valiant. So you have your Monstrous Rage, Sheltered by Ghost in here. Shard Mage's Rescue as protection. Demonic Ruckus is an enchantment that also works. Ethereal Armor, kind of all mixed into there. You do have much worse mana base because you don't get the extra untapped duel. And then your sideboard, Helixes as removal, Urbrass Forge for the grindier matchups, Get Lost, Torch the Tower, just kind of in here. You could also play something like Invasion of the White Invasion, 2 mana to eat at their hand type effects. There's stuff like that you can also play. So then we go to 5-color Domain. So Domain is at 58%. So this is mainly a green-white that is playing into Atraxa and the Domain effects. With this, it's playing a number of the new Overlords. You have Overlord of the Hauntwoods. So the 3 mana side, kind of where you want to look at. It enters the battlefield. It ramps you by creating an everything land, which is basically every land type. It's a rainbow land, and it turns on Domain by itself. And then when it attacks, you get that as well. Then you also have Overlord of the Mistmoors, 4 mana on the cheaper side. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you create 2 1/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. The Impending side, if you cast that, it still triggers up the Beanstalk, so you get card draw. The rest of the deck's pretty stock in terms of what we've seen in Domain in the past. So the one thing you may want to consider is with Cavernous Souls, they may now be naming Horror or Avatar in addition to the Angels, which are previously named in the past. Sideboard's got some Graveyard Hate, cheap counters, some various removal, Whirlback for Artifact Enchantment Hate or Graveyard Hate, some life gain, Beza for the aggressive decks, Baloth for heavy discard, or bring it in against the aggressive decks as well, it just gains you some life. And then Nissa is really good in the mirror, it's kind of the Caretaker talent style decks. We're going, folks. We're only halfway there. Azorius Tempo. So this is the Azorius Oculus deck. This deck was doing very well in Best of 1 as well. So this one's at 56%. So we've seen these Helping Hand recommission decks in the past. Usually they play the Haughty Djinn and the Monastery Mentor. These are playing Abhorrent Oculus, another new card from the set. 3 mana, 5/5s, additional cost, exile 6 cards from your graveyard. So it's kind of self-milling, so it can enable that side, but then you can bring it back for cheap. It's flying 5/5, which is great stats. In the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you manifest Dread. What that is you look at the top 2 cards of your library, you put 1 face down, 1 into your graveyard. There's a creature that's face down, you could turn it face up at any time by paying its mana cost. So we have that. Then we have like Into the Flood mod, cheap interaction, a bunch of just cheap counters, draw, discard style effects kind of mixed into there. The one thing I would say, this list isn't currently playing Elspeth Smite. I would probably look to find a little space for some Elspeth Smite in the 75. If you do start getting a little bit more of these aggressive decks coming up, I think it's a good option in there. Doorkeeper Thrall for Under the Battlefield style effects from Artifacts Creatures. Exercise, another new card, a really strong sideboard card. 2 mana, exile artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. Notably, this is sorcery speed, not instant speed like Destroy Evil. Cheap counters, Graveyard Hate, it could Soul Flanker, some more removal with Soul Partition, and temporary lockdowns. I'm not going to go in this deck in detail, but I just want to show the Squirming Emergence decks kind of playing into Terror, Portal 1, just all the big fatty stuff. Not doing that well right now, 38%. So just kind of sharing that in case people were looking to build that. It's a very mythic and rare intensive deck, so try to save people wild cards. One community deck and that I thought was really cool, and then we'll go to the MTGO League stuff and some tournament results. This one is from Adam Aces. They're 8-0, so not a huge sample size, but I thought this deck was really sweet. So it's a Dimir kind of, let's call it Dimir Inverter, like we had in Pioneer. Doomsday Executioner. Look at that mana cost, folks. 6 mana, Grey Merchant, rubbing his hands in excitement. Flying, enters a battlefield. If it was cast, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of the library face down. Beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card. This is going to be comboed with Jace to basically mill them out that same turn, which is kind of cool. Or you could Outrageous Robbery and mill them that way there. Notably, you don't get to set up what your bottom 6 cards are, but you kind of have the Jace on the field or have Robbery in hand and kind of go from there. The rest of it is a Dimir control deck, Deadly Cover-Ups, bunch of cheap removal, Hand Hate, Insatiable Avarice can help you draw some cards. This is actually target player as well, so you can use Avarice as a way to force them to draw some cards as well. Your sideboard, hand hates, cheap counters, stone brain if you want to pick out any sort of specific piece. Come back wrong is a new removal spell, destroy target creature. If it was put in the graveyard, return to the battlefield under your control, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Notably, the creature does not get haste, but it is a way to kind of blow up their creature. If it's like a Traxa, you get that value, draw a bunch of cards. Sidebinders, just more activated abilities. Withering Torment, blows up enchantments in addition to creatures. Leyline, the Void for graveyard hate, and another sweeper in Deadly Cover-Up. All right, so first one up, Golgari Midrange. So nothing crazy new with this. It's a lot of the Golgari lists are just small tweaks week over week, or it's just kind of let's shift this or that. There's a lot of flexible tools in Golgari to deal with various types of metagame. It's one of the better mid-range shells. So this one here is from Victor Carvalho, MTGO grinder, generally plays very well. So this one here, like one Aklazots, we see Shieldred coming back as a 2 of, Archfiend of the Dross, another just beater in terms of that slot. So a little bit more creature dense, no combo in this version, going with Affliction in the main, along with Go for the Throat. Notably no cut down in this list, which is kind of interesting. We also see Analyze the Pollen, early land drops it can hit, and then late game it can tutor for specific pieces. We also see like Pillage the Bog is another way to kind of tutor in the deck. Or at least find new key cards. Cruel Claw Heist is some more hand hate, some virtues in here. So just grind them out, kind of mid-range shell. Not really any new cards. Pretty stock in terms of your sideboard. Throwback, as we mentioned. Harvester, really good against the go-wide decks. Hand hate and Duress, and like Cruel Claw, more Liliana for the grindier matchups. Cruelty Gix is sweeper, and then Nissa for all the like Caretaker style lands. It's good against the domain decks, stuff like that. So this one here was also part of the Japanese tournament over the weekend. This one went 6-2 in the top 8. So this is a Dimir Midrange deck. So we have the Shaman's Tidebinder, Spyglass Sirens, like the Gix package. We also have Unstoppable Slasher in this list, another way to deal big chunks of damage. We have Enduring Curiosity. So we're seeing another of the Enduring cycle get played. So this one is like Coastal Piracy in a way. The enchantment effect, so it's a flash 4/3, which isn't terrible stats, but whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to player, you draw a card, and then when it dies, it becomes an enchantment that does that. Between Enduring Curiosity and Gix, a lot of ways to draw cards with cheap evasive creatures. Cheap removal, cut down, go for the throat, Phantom Interference as a cheap counter. Nowhere to Run is another new card, 2 mana. Enters target creature an opponent controls gets -3/3, and then it gets rid of ward abilities. So creatures your opponent control can be target of spells or abilities, though they didn't have hexproof, and then ward abilities don't get triggered. Another new land in Gloom Lake Verge. Ghost Vacuum, Rona's Vortex, really good against all the pump style effects. Cheap kind of counters. Dreams is more hand hate. We have the new Kaido in here. Ninja it out, kind of for the grindier matchups. Negate, Filigree Silex for the kind of token go wide decks, along with Glistening Deluge, Nowhere to Run, and then a Fairy Mastermind. Could also play the new like 3 mana black enchantment removal in here, just as some more effect, like flexible cards. So this one here, another one from that tournament, another top 8 deck. So this is Naya Caretaker. So you have the engine of like Urbrass Forge, along with Caretaker's talents. This one here is playing up the Beanstalk for value, Leyline Binding in here. Then you have the Overlord of the Hauntwoods, as well as the Overlord of the Mistmoors, kind of mixed into there. Herd Migration as a way to find your lands, like the engine. So it's kind of a mashup between Domain and the Caretaker's talents deck. Some cheap removal. We see like the Analyze Pollen, Bushwhack can help you find basic lands as well. Now, notably, you'll notice the deck is only producing Naya, but you're like, well, you don't get the cost reduction on Leyline. Remember, the Overlord of the Hauntwoods makes it so you get every color. Sideboard, Graveyard Hate and Rest in Peace. You have Aven Interrupters, kind of flash tempo piece. Calamity's Wake, a card that hasn't really seen much play. Exile all graveyards, players can't cast non-creature spells this turn. And then exile Calamity's Wake. An interesting one. I don't really see, like, you already have Rest in Peace and there's not like combo Storm. I'd probably just play like another Lockdown maybe. You can kind of, like the Exercise is a nice 4 of in the deck. Probably other things you can play in the slot. Like even just playing Nissa is a nice card. Just kind of mixed into there as well. So the only red card in the deck is actually Urbrass Forge. Then we go to an MTGO challenge. This one got second place, 7-2 by Lucas Dusek. And this is Zur, the Eternal Schemer, a kind of 4-color non-red. So Zur is really interesting of a card. 3 mana, 1/4 flying. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And then, so that makes all your Overlords naturally get that typo. But what you can do is, with the Overlords, you can pay the impending cost and then animate them for 2 mana, and then they get the attack trigger still, and they get the boost. A lot of them have like high CMC costs. So like this becomes like a 5/5. This, like the Overlord of the Mistmoors, is a 7/7, which is really strong. You have Archangels, so it's kind of like a Domain Zur kind of a mashup deck. You have the End in here, Anoint with Affliction as cheap removal. A little bit more black based, so like Abzanashi, Kaya, Intangible Slayer in here, Jace Perfected Mind, all mixed in. Just various removal stuff. Rankle's Prank's an interesting one. We haven't really seen much play with here. Sack 2 creatures, lose 4 life, discards 2 cards, because for the grindier matchups. Good against Valkavoth. Well, just because it's like sack. Hellish Norn for the mirror. Cease Desist is another card that could see more play potentially. For the desist side, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Pretty strong. Graveyard Hate, and then negates or counter spells. And then lastly, we have a deck that not really new cards in it, but we've seen some variations. It keeps putting up results. It's a cool one. It's Simic Terror. So this is a Simic deck that's using up the Beanstalk with things like Eddie Merc Crab and Tolarian Terror to get cheap big creatures that trigger. Get Out as a way to counter target creature enchantment, which hits a lot of the stuff in the format right now. Return creature enchantments you own to your hand. So it's more like just a cheap counter spell. Cash Grab mills you over. Bushwhack helps you find lands. There's only 16 lands in this deck. So you're playing like Analyze the Pollen, Bushwhack as ways to kind of fill your graveyard, then help you find lands, but then later have some other utility as well. Brave the Wild, similar effect. You have Storm Chaser's Talent, makes you an otter, and then could be late game kind of an engine for the deck as you kind of play a bunch of spells. The deck itself is playing... How do they cast... Oh, they have 1 mountain to the side. I was going to say, how do they cast these spells? So when you need it, you have Lithomantic Barrage and Pyroclasm. You can just board into the 1 mountain. Lots of ways to find it. 3 steps ahead is more counters. Pick your poison, flexible removal option, and then some negates as counter. That is all, folks. That was a long one. Nearly 30 minutes of content. Like I said, if you enjoy this, do appreciate if you could drop a subscription. Helps a lot. And likes, comments also help push the video out to more folks. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one, and hope you enjoy Standard.